All right, we're good to go. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to see everyone survived the gala. Um, and it's great to welcome you here to our Saturday morning panel for this year's Welty Symposium. So I am Dr. Matthew Moniz. I teach English here at the W, and it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce our four writers for our grand finale session. I want to begin by thanking the Robert M. Herron Foundation for their support of the symposium. I want to thank the readers who've given such wonderful readings so far and the ones we're about to hear from. And I want to thank all of you for being here. All right. I do want everyone to take a minute right now to silence their cell phones so we can listen to this fine literature undisturbed. I also want to remind you that your program has this little survey. This is the last session. This is your last chance to fill it out. So any feedback you give us is going to be really helpful. Also, because this is our last session, please be mindful of your belongings and litter. We want to leave this wonderful space in the pristine state it was when we began a couple days ago. So this panel is going to work the same as all of the others. Each author is going to get about 40 minutes to read and then answer questions from the audience. We'll have a quick 5-minute break after our second reader. So let's get into it. Our first reader today is Todd Osborne. Todd Osborne's Gatherer weaves public history, personal history, shades of grief, and most importantly, love into a calm, composed, contented collection of poems that provides a slice of life look at America and its South today. I'm feeling that these poems kind of borrow a little something from the pastoral in terms of their attitude and contemplative nature, if not in subject material. But they bring in that strong sense of home and place. As Osborne himself said in an interview with Rooted, home is a place you choose. Easy enough for home to be where you are from, but more meaningful for home to be where you decide to stay. Todd Osborne was born and raised in Nashville and now lives in Hattiesburg since completing his PhD in creative writing at the Center for Writers at the University of Southern Mississippi. He is feedback editor for Tinderbox Poetry Journal and a poetry reader for Memorious. His poems have appeared in journals including Missouri Review and Tar River Poetry. Please help me welcome Todd Osborne and his debut poetry collection, Gatherer, to the stage.
Hello, welcome. Good morning. How's everyone doing? Yes, thank you for coming out on a Saturday morning to hear some literature. It's going to be a wonderful day, and I am so honored and grateful to get to be a part of this wonderful event. When I was sent the email, I thought there must have been a mistake, but I'm glad that it wasn't a mistake. Um, yeah, I'm gonna read some poems. I had originally thought like, oh, I should be really serious and write a bunch of stuff down to say, and then that's silly. You're here to hear some literature, so let's do that instead. This is called Ode to August Walker. I will say I love to talk between poems. Like my favorite part of going to a concert is when the band's just like chatting with each other between, because it feels like you really get to know them. I will just say very briefly, for anyone that is a fan of action movies, specifically the Mission Impossible series, the Tom Cruise movies, this is about I think the fifth one, Mission Impossible Fallout, and specifically Henry Cavill's character, who is apparently named August Walker. I had to look this up. But if you ever saw the movie or even saw the trailer for it, there's a moment where he's about to fight someone and he cocks his fist as if they were like a shotgun. And it stuck with me. And so this is a poem about that. Ode to August Walker. The week my grandmother died, I bought a 5-pack of Mission Impossible movies on Blu-ray and a Blu-ray player. Watched Tom Cruise grow older without seeming to age. And all of this can be blamed on grief, how it squirms its way into every situation, no matter how mundane. And you are crying outside of your apartment door, your mother on the phone, the one you love standing within arm's reach. And you remember seeing the newest trailer, how Henry Cavill cocks his fists like he knows they could kill a man back to life. Thank you. I grew up in Tennessee, in Nashville, just outside Nashville. And I think every state does this, but fourth grade was the year you learned about Tennessee history. And so we traveled around to a bunch of historic sites, including, Andrew Jackson's mansion, the Hermitage, and Bellmead Plantation. And I didn't think of it then, but when I was thinking on it later, as an adult, I was like, this is such a weird thing that we did because they only talked about the people who lived in the plantations, right? They didn't talk about all the people that also lived on the plantation, the majority of the people that lived there. And so this poem is about that. It's called Self-Portrait as Mountain of Discarded Limbs. On the tour of the antebellum mansion, where no one says the word slave as if it is a curse, the guide steps into a small room he identifies as a guest room, tells us to follow, and that during the war, this was a surgical chamber. That window, he says, is where the doctors would toss the appendages after amputation. And how not to imagine that hill of limbs, the height of it, how many soldiers were dismembered in this place. The tour guide offers a number I don't recall, but the image is indelible. When he asks for questions, I and nod and stay silent. My mouth is an arm. When I was in my MFA, I thought that the greatest response you could have to someone reading a poem was silence. And I think I was wrong, as I often am. You can clap or snap or whatever feels appropriate. I was talking about this with someone the other day. There's a piece of public art in downtown Nashville called Ghost Ballet, and it looks like two like roller coaster tracks, and it's supposed to represent something that I'm sure was very important to the artist. But to me, I just think it's very silly. And so I wrote a poem about it, and it also sort of references the protests that happened in Nashville, specifically in 2020, following the murder of George Floyd. And there was a group of people who sat in on or occupied the Legislative Plaza right outside of, the place where they make laws in Nashville. And they said, this is now the People's Plaza. They renamed it the Ida B. Wells Plaza. And in response to that, the Nashville legislature made it illegal to congregate in that place. This is called Ghost Ballet. My hometown has suspicious taste in communal art. There was a roller coaster by the river, the one that flooded its banks in 2010, which no one remembers unless you were there, unless you felt water pouring 2 days straight and worried what would be left. And I guess what I mean is there are two tracks of red steel tangled, not like lovers, but like the arms of a robot, or the kinds of minds that see a body on their steps as a threat, legislate rights only to those who look like them and none else. It's called Ghost Ballet because that's the only kind of ballet left in Nashville. It's called Ghost Ballet because the afterlife funds the arts more than Nashville. It's called Ghost Ballet because I and you and we can never return to where we once were, always ghosting our way down the city, down Hermitage Avenue toward Broad, and there it waits on the far bank, a solo dancer with the lights turned off, a ballerina in an empty room. I tricked y'all into clapping for me. I appreciate it. I'm going to read two poems that have the same title. They're both called A History of Gardening. They are 21 lines each. And so me being a pretentious grad student when I was at USM, I decided to title these A Sonetto e Messo, which is just Italian for sonnet and a half. I took that out when I published them because it was too much. But if you want to think of these as a new kind of sonnet, I welcome you to do so. A History of Gardening. Both of my grandfathers have gardens, roses, zucchini, okra, beauty, and utility. I would like a garden to call out to once a week after dark. How are you? If the flowers crook their stems, if the bushes stop rustling, I will take that as answer. Keep watch over them as a trellis. I will take my time, bend into their ears, whisper sweet somethings, tuck them in, pat their beds with water from a metal can. Even after death, my grandfather's work continues. The gardens return what they have received. Some people can do a lot with a small plot, but I am useless even in an expanse. The ground is patient. It will do what it can, but first, action is required. Rain may fall, may wash the ground or flood us all away. I could wither, could decide not to stay. My grandfathers have gardens. I will have what remains. A history of gardening. My grandfathers have gardens. I have what remains. Another winter in an uncold place. My parents waiting the other side of a phone, an empty table in an empty room. I say make what you will of imagery. Somewhere else, a hawk pierces the corona of the sun. A car bisects perfectly a suburban driveway. There are hands, handoffs, and hand-me-downs. They all work single-handedly. I can tell you a story about gardens, a history of peering over a grandfather's shoulder. I can make you believe I know what I am saying. But when my sweat falls to the earth, it is rejected out of hand, and I don't mind. I straighten my back, crack my neck, and go inside for the day. When I write this down, I mean to say something small and adjacent to the truth. The way a watering can is meant to service a patch of land, not an expanse. Summer means to warm and stop, not pass into fall and winter. We want our garden friends to settle down, pick our yard for their home. When they move away, we let them make do with their new green remains. I had the immense privilege and pleasure to take part in a workshop this fall that was led by C.T. Salazar, who was in the audience. He didn't know I was going to do this, so I'm embarrassing C.T. So sorry. But it was a great workshop about sort of Mississippi poetics, and I got a couple poems out of it, but I'm going to just read one that's not in the book. I'm working on a series of poems that are odes, sort of like Ode to August Walker, just poems about different things. And then what I'm calling anodes, which are just things I don't like. So this is an anode. It is called An Ode to Not Speaking. In this one, I am not silent, which is no shock. I rarely am. However, I am also not too noisy. I radiate enamoredly. I am looking at my newborn son, a king in a green swaddle, mewling and perfect, and now, all at once, screaming into my face, with his face pinched into a perfect facsimile of a character actor going bald at 40, so that they will be typecast for years. And what is any parent going to do when presented with their child, yowling as if I had stolen his ability for speech, a thing which, as of yet, he has not developed, and which I hope he will develop post haste, so he may tell his mother and I when he is ailing, and also what ails him. I held him. I lifted him up and back. I cooed, "It is all right. It will be all right. It has been all right," into his soft ear. When I say I do not wish for silence, I mean precisely this. I want to know what those I care for are thinking, and nothing else. I'm not a simple person in general. I think a lot, and often in unhelpful ways. I did not tell anyone my real opinion on AI when they mentioned it at the mandatory all-staff meeting. I wanted to. I did not exactly begin to cry when my son began to cry, and did not cease his crying for many, many moments. I tried to 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, to keep a record of what he was trying to say and how long he was speaking. I became lost imagining a world with many kinds of Mississippis. In this one, democracy works the way it is meant to. In that one, no one is placed in any prison whatsoever. In a third, songs written for this place only mention the love of the people who live here. There is simply nothing else to say. In the final, awful Mississippi, I envisioned a place where we did not speak to each other, either through mishap or dismay. It was, for me, the saddest one. I cast it away as into a fire, to conflagrate and make itself into a long, distant memory. I asked it impolitely to burn. Trying to figure out how much time I've got. I think more than I expected. I've got some number of other poems. We'll see how many I get to. I was at a reading once, and Ada Limon, National U.S. Poet Laureate, said, "I always like to tell people exactly how many poems I'm reading, so they know what to expect. Because if you go to a poetry reading, 8 poems feels a lot different than 18 poems." And I think that's really smart, and I did not do that. I will leave y'all in suspense. Um, I will say as preface, this is a prose poem called A History of Genealogies. It's always so funny whenever you talk about prose poems because people are like, but why is it a poem? There's no lines. To which I respond, it's a poem because the person who wrote it said it's a poem. A History of Genealogies. My father's grandfather was born Rutherford B. Hayes Osborne, after a president that most don't recall in any way. First president to win despite losing the popular election, showing the American story of democracy to be just that. He ended Reconstruction too, and I suppose it is the latter that makes him a proper name for a child born in the South at the beginning of the 20th century. But my great-grandfather thought his birth certificate read B. Hazel because some nurse mistook him for a baby girl, misread or misheard what the doctor said. So he went by BH his whole life. Maybe he blushed when asked what the letters stood for. Maybe, like Truman's S, he said they stood for nothing. Still, it is almost magical in its storiness. First told to me years ago by my father while I sat on the big freezer, legs dangling, his face stuck in a PC's guts as he pulled out arteries and reattached organs, rebooted the heart with a few clicks. What are the chances of that? What luck? My father stared me down and simply said, "There's no such thing as luck, only faith." And I agreed with him then. But I would say now, I would have my younger self say, there are stories, pieces of luck and faith strung together until you can't tell the difference. It's so funny when you write stuff and then if you put your family into it, especially I'm sure a lot of you guys know this, they have different reactions to it. My mother read this collection and said, "Are you depressed?" And I said, maybe, I don't know. My dad read it and he said, I'm still right about that. There's no such thing as luck. And if you believe in luck, that means you can't believe in God. And I said, I don't know. We're going to have to agree to disagree on that one because there's a lot of things that sure I hope are just pure dumb luck. Here's another one that my dad also didn't like. It's called "The Idea of Cutting a V into Your Toenail is an Old Wives' Tale." Do you guys know this? If you have ingrown toenails, the theory is if you cut a V in the middle, your toenail will grow in instead of growing out. This is not true, but I did it for many years. I did it for many years because my dad had been told that by his mother and grandmother probably, and he totally innocently told me this as if it was true. You're just supposed to cut flat across, of course, of course. My father told me a lie, and I believed him. In ancient Greek, apocalypsis means an uncovering or a revelation. An apocalypse I keep returning to because it is important for me to tell you, to bring apocalypse to you. It is the watermark of everything written these days, when the sky is orange the way a campfire is, or the way a used fireplace might be, or the way a fire makes it. And if apocalypse is not an end, but a peeling back of dead skin, a debriding of a wound, then why look at any apocalypse as necessarily tragic, instead of seeing what could be? Once all was one, land masses huddled together, and we have been working toward that again. The waters rise unceasingly. There is one ocean again. Our bodies float to make the new Pangea, and finally, we will all be one. Doing like quick math in my head. I'm going to read two more, I think, unless I feel like reading more. This is the first poem in the collection. It's called Ars Poetica, which is just like a pretentious title that poets like to throw around a lot. And it makes us feel, I don't know, it makes me feel very smart when I call something an Ars Poetica. But it's just a way of talking about the art of poetry, right? The craft, how to make a poem. A lot of these poems, some of them were from my dissertation. I graduated in 2019. And then right after that, I started teaching high school. And my first year, during spring break, our superintendent emailed us and said, don't come back because COVID happened. And we did not return until August. And then we taught the next year, fully masked, hybrid, you guys know, all the things. And so it was a pretty crazy time to be, you know, thinking and writing. And so this came out of that. It is hard to craft a metaphor when the world is burning. It is difficult to construct an image when a place you love is on fire. When flames lick up the side of your beloved childhood home, how can you write about hope? In the ashes, can you write a stanza? When the ash is blowing all around you, in your eyes, your lungs, your hair, could you push through to an other side? Say, hypothetically, you can't leave your house for a year or more. Would you be able to look for glimmers of light in all that darkness? The light bulbs in the kitchen go out first, and the sun is blotted out. Poor air quality, the news says. After another month, no light in any room, and you have a scented candle, you're not sure you can smell anymore. And what does that mean? And you are cobbling together two lines on a sticky note with a pencil, no eraser. So whatever you say has to be final. As I said, I grew up in Nashville and I'm like a city kid. I'm an indoor kid all the way. But the school I teach at is in rural Mississippi. It's in a town called Columbia, which is not Columbus, importantly. And so, you know, there's a lot of the kids there have totally different upbringings from mine. And so this is a poem that came out of one of those experiences, and it is called Ant Bed. I didn't know what it was. This patch of dirt across the crease between the wall where my only functioning window sits and the floor, near where a student sits in every class, a surefire way to get noticed in a high school classroom, to exist and also to be out of place, like I felt in middle school and high school too, until I didn't, until it felt like I could just exist without any kind of notice. And yet, when a student said, so surprised, you don't know what an ant bed is? How to explain? I am not, will never be, who they think I might be. And still an indoor kid trying to win whatever affection might be thrown my way, however small or ineffective it might be, however slight. No, I don't. But I can make an uneducated guess. Imagine row after row of workers after a long day of teaching, I'd joke, but no, gathering, right? For their queen. Ants have those, I've heard, or maybe misremembered from some movie, like an anthill, my student says now, gathering to look at it, though we shouldn't gather. And yet, what to make of it when outside comes in? Not quite uncanny, but still unusual to see a little hive in the making, a functioning society, so unlike, how else to say this? My classroom, this county, state, nation. It is best to stay in the image, my teachers might have said, to focus on the ant bed, the texture of it, how it moved within itself, tiny workers so happy to do what they are told. And if they die in this service, it is considered not at all. The work continues. A single ant can carry the world if it must, but it needs a colony to make a bed their home. Thank you so much. Okay. I think maybe one more, right? That feels right. I'm trying to figure out, okay, This is maybe I think I'm gonna make it. This is a poem about my wife had a cat named Edward that she loved very much, who tragically passed a couple years ago. And when I first met her, it's in the poem, but I'll tell you because it's so insane, you need to maybe hear it twice. I told her cats don't have any feelings. Any emotion you feel for a cat is just your own love reflected in its eyes. A real human thing that I said, and now we have 3 cats that I love very much, and they love me. Um, I read this at I think I want to say it was like my book launch or something, and I could not make it through. I cried. I was like weeping. I don't think that's going to happen today, if only because it's so early and I'm very sweaty. But if I start crying, just pretend it's normal. This is called a love poem. This is the actual last one. And then if you have any questions, please come up and I'd love to talk with you guys. When we started dating, I told my wife, cats cannot feel love. That, and I quote, any emotion you see in their eyes is simply a reflection of your own peering back at you. Now I find myself tucked over a food bowl, spooning moist pats of salmon onto my fingers and presenting it to our cat as if he were a god, and I a humble supplicant with the merest offering. I don't know if he loves me, though I think he might, but I know I love him. And as I'm so often wrong about things, my wife likes to mention this to me. Did you ever think you would love 2 cats? We had 2 cats at the time. Now we have 3. Did you ever think you would love 2 cats? She asks. And I answer, of course, no. What else could I say? I'm trying to fall in love with the world. I'm trying my best. I am tired all the time, but when a cat curls onto my stomach or across my lap, I feel loved. Of course I do. To feel otherwise would be preposterous. I feel my cat's sandpaper tongue, and it feels like a benison, matins and vesper in one, and I like the holiest child of some not entirely holy deity. I am praying he may be eternal. I am sending him all my love and receiving something like love in return, a warmth and a breath more real than most people have shown. He will recover, I'm sure, and we will have many years of this to go. I will continue in awe of him, in love with a being whose own capacities are simply unknowable. A bottomless pond, the heights of the sky, the sea. Thank you so much. I think we got time for some questions if anyone has them. If not, I can't tap dance, but I can pretend to tap dance. Okay, thank you. It's so scary if I just start tap dancing.
Okay, so in a lot of these poems, you're talking about inheritance in some way, whether that is family inheritance, emotional inheritance, physical, etc. Growing up in Nashville with people who have been there before.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about how you think about inherited memory, how you think about what's been passed down to you when you're writing your poetry?
Yes. This collection specifically is very interested in histories. And like one of the things, there's a lot of, you saw it a little bit in History of Gardening. There's a sort of running theme of poems with the title, A History of Something. And so I thought it would be, first I did it as kind of a joke to say like a history of, like some broad concept. I know nothing about gardening, but what if I told you the history of gardening and it's just me talking about my grandfathers for a couple of poems? So I think that's happening. And I think also like for me as a poet, I don't know that I can't extricate myself from those inheritances, right? Like they are part of, like literally part of my DNA, but also just part of the things that are so interesting to me. What does it mean to grow up, as a white man in the South, in Nashville, and now living in Mississippi, these places that have such history, and like I've inherited a lot from that, good and bad, right? And I think to not talk about that openly, I was so I'm thinking about James yesterday saying like everyone should write about everything, right? Like, it's not, I don't feel like I'm not like patting myself on the back for saying that like the South can be kind of a crappy place sometimes and a beautiful place, right? We all love the South. That's why we're here. But if you don't confront the parts of it that you want to change, then how are they going to change? Right? Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's a part of it. Yes. Yeah, 100%. So I grew up, the question was, can I speak to my relationship with God and race in developing this collection? Um, I grew up very Christian, went to church 3 times a week. Still have an interesting relationship with God, I think. It's one of those things that I probably am just sort of not thinking about a lot right now because I'm just trying to make it through the day. But it's such a part of like how I was raised and like what was important to me. That like it had to be in the book, right? Like it was just going to be in there. The title Gatherer comes from it was the last thing I did for the book. It didn't have a title. It was for many years, it was called History Lessons when there were more history poems. And then I cut a lot of those out and it didn't fit anymore. And I was trying to find a title and I was looking up. There's a poem that references Ecclesiastes in here. And I was like, oh yeah, what did they call the guy? He's often called like the preacher or the guy who speaks in Ecclesiastes. And one translation of it was gatherer. And I thought, oh, that's so good, right? Like that's the goal of hopefully most artists and poets, especially, you're gathering all these things together and sharing them with people, right? Um, and yeah, just to go back to your question specifically, yeah, I think like I had to bring that in. And then yes, so I grew up and I've only sort of in the last couple of years, I mean, had this like realization sadly, but I grew up at what we might unlovingly call a segregation academy. I went to a private school, pre-K through 12. That's like explicit job was to keep white kids away from anyone that wasn't white. And so I've had to wrestle with that a lot and think like, well, what does that mean for me? And like, how do I deal with that? So there's a poem in here about, it's called A History of Leaf Projects, I think, or A History of Trees. And it sort of talks about that experience of like going to that school a little bit. It just sort of obliquely references it. But I think at least partially in my writing, I'm just trying to be honest about like the way I grew up, and like part of that is talking about race, right? Yeah. Does that answer your question? Thank you. That was a great question.
Yeah, please go to one of the mics. We can hear you pretty well in the room, but there are some viewers on YouTube who won't hear you and might hear your brilliant questions later.
Yes. No, you're okay. Take your time.
Hi. Sorry, I'm having to read it off because my brain is not working this morning.
That's okay. It's early. You're allowed.
I said, you play with the concept of intercepting life and death, particularly in Ode to August work, August Walker, which is what we were talking about at dinner, and Ghost Ballet. How has writing poetry influenced your perception of life and death, and how do they merge into the arts in your perception?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really, really great question. I mean, I think for me, I think maybe it was Brooke or somebody said yesterday that like writing is not therapy, but it is therapeutic, right? Like sometimes you need to write about things that happen to you in order to be able to process them, right? So yes, there is August Walker. That's a true story. The week my grandmother died, I was like, well, I have to watch every Mission Impossible movie, and I'm not going to interrogate why. um, and so there's this part where it's like, yeah, there is this realization, right? Especially as you, yeah, experience more of the sort of grief of death, right? That it is just a part of life. And so once again, it's about that like honesty. Are you going to write about it? Are you going to try to run away from it? There's a long poem in here that I personally love called Promise Start, that is an elegy for my grandfather who had dementia. And I did not read it because a 5-page poem is, to me, feels mean in a in a reading like this because you really have to pay attention. But if you get the book, I encourage you to look at it. And for me, I think it's so important to recognize that like in the midst of all of our pains, right? Like all the sadnesses, the griefs that we bear, there is a lot of joy, right? And I think I heard someone say recently, like if you are feeling sad about someone who died, it means you really love them, right? You get to continually remember that person. So like if I read August Walker, I think about like the good things about, I'm not thinking about my grandmother dying. I'm thinking about like the positive things she brought to my life. So yeah, I think that's just part of what it means sometimes to be a writer is to try to bring those two ideas together. Yeah. One more question, or are we done? Bueller?
Thank you for being so delightful.
Yeah.
And everything. If you could just talk for a minute, real basic bitch, general question, but just you have interesting forms and you talked about prose poems and like an anode and like, so
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear you talk maybe about how form matches content for you or how like inventing a new form or like
Sure.
messing with an old one, how that
Yeah.
works in your process.
Thank you so much. That's a great, I'm glad you asked. I love form. I could talk about it all day. I'm not one of those poets who's like, I'm going to write in rhyme and meter because I'll be honest, it's really hard, right? If anyone's tried to write a metrical, iambic pentameter poem like Shakespeare or Robert Frost, there's a reason why they are Shakespeare and I'm not. And it's, but I love form. I think the thing I love the most about form is that it sets up expectations, right? And you as the writer get to either meet those expectations in a really interesting way or upset those expectations in a really interesting way. So if I'm writing, a sonnet, like, does it move the way that you expect a sonnet to? Does it do something differently? Yeah, I think like in terms of like the ode and anode, those are forms, right? Like they're like these like an ode is like one of the oldest forms we have, right? It comes to us from like ancient Greece. And so what does it mean to, I was just thinking there has to have been like, if you go back to something like Shay Shonigan's Pillow Book, right? She's writing like, here are things I find disgusting, right? And I'm like, well, there has to be something for us to do today where we can do the same kind of thing. Like, oh, I want to write about something that just really grinds my gears or something. And so I love form. I think this idea that form like pins people in is wrong, right? It really frees you because you don't have to think as much about like, well, how long is this poem going to be or what's it going to look like? You've got it, right? It's there. It's 14 lines. It's, if it's a a sestina, it's 39 lines, whatever. So it really frees you up to have more fun with it. And for me, if you're not having fun in the writing, then like you should probably stop writing. Thank you so much. That was a great question. Thank you all so much.
All right, thank you, Todd. Our next reader is Kemeshia Randle Swanson. Kemeshia Randle Swanson's Maverick Feminist is the winner of this year's Eudora Welty Prize. This scholarly text celebrates the rejection of respectability politics by self-identified, self-sexualized, and self-actualized Black feminist figures as an unapologetic apologist for their enduring strength. It lives up to its revolutionary project with an accessible, engaging writing style that resists the hubristic strictures that we've come to expect from academic writing, while also discussing examples from titans of the past like Zora Neale Hurston to current pop cultural icons like Beyonce to thoughtfully display the range of lived Black feminist experience. Originally from the Mississippi Delta, Kemeshia Randle Swanson is Assistant Professor of English and African American Studies at Mississippi State University, where her research interests include African American literature, Southern literature, gender and sexuality studies, and hip hop and popular culture. Please help me welcome Kemeshia Randle Swanson and Maverick Feminist to the stage.
Get my timer going. So good morning. Can everybody hear me fine? Awesome. So before I actually get started with my talk, I just wanted to offer some words of gratitude. Thank you for that awesome introduction. Thank all of you for being here, especially on a Saturday morning. Thank you to Kendall, to the English department, and the entire MUW family for welcoming us here to this awesome symposium. Thank you to my fellow authors for sharing your inspiring and encouraging stories. Thank you to the students who have been engaging and critical throughout this entire symposium. And also thank you to the community members in Columbus who have come out and witnessed this symposium and call it your own. So as I was actually sitting in the audience yesterday and enjoying the presentations, after a brief intermission, I began to have a conversation with an audience member. One whom I talked with and got to know and learn was actually a member of the community, one who attends this event yearly. We, again, got to know one another, learned that we had a few things in common, including the fact that we were proud Mississippi girls and also members of the same sorority. So we continued to talk more and we expressed how we enjoyed the presentations that we had just heard. And she realized that she actually didn't have a program, that she wanted to be able to look at the names and the bios of the presenters that we had just listened to so that she could remember their stories, their names, their identities. And then she mentioned how she was super excited to come back on tomorrow, especially to hear one in particular author. She wanted to meet one specific author. So I gladly pulled out my program and handed it to her and allowed her to look over and read the bios and then said, well, who's the author you want to meet tomorrow? Would it happen to be this person? And I pointed to my name on the program and she said, yes, her. So I smiled coyly and said, hey, girl. And we hugged and continued to have interesting conversations. So to that sister, I'm so glad that you made it today. Thank you again for making my Friday awesome. And I hope that your Saturday is worth it as well. All right. Okay. Here goes. A few weeks ago, a publicist from the University Press of Mississippi contacted me to inform me that an online community, the Black Feminist Collective, had reached out to see if I would be interested in doing an interview about my recent book, Maverick, Feminist, what I affectionately refer to as my first book baby. She said that if I was interested in participating in the interview, she'd share contact information so that I could reach out and set up the terms. In my mind, I was thinking, what do you mean if? I was definitely going to do this interview. I didn't care who it was with. This was my first book baby, but in the publishing world, I am still a baby. If someone actually read an entire book of words that I wrote, little old me had questions and cared about my thoughts, you betcha I was doing the interview. But I didn't want to seem too desperate, so I didn't respond to their request on that same day. I waited until the next day. One of the questions they asked was regarding what they called my origin story, when I became a Maverick feminist. Here's what I told them, quote, unbeknownst to me, I've been a Maverick feminist for the majority of my life. As a result, I had a very problematic relationship with my father as a teen and a young adult. He meant well, but even then, I couldn't jive with the fact that he was always trying to box me in, police me, make me succumb to respectability politics that I didn't agree with. I remember asking him after one of our many disagreements if he was going to police my younger brother in the same way. We all know that didn't happen, and therein lies the societal problem. Luckily, my dad and I have a good relationship in my adulthood. I think now he accepts that I found my own way and remained safe. That was all he wanted all along. Of course, it's easier to see and understand things in hindsight. Writing Maverick Feminist helped me better process and understand my upbringing and past choices, and it guides my choices today. My husband says I should have named the book Hard-Headed Feminist because I can usually be found doing and saying the opposite of what's expected. But what I've learned in my adult life is that what's expected of Black women and Black people in general usually doesn't benefit us. It benefits the people with the expectations, the people making the rules. And it stifles freedom and enjoyment out of our lives, takes away those inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, long story short, I've been a maverick feminist for as long as I can remember. I just didn't have the language to describe it when I was younger, end quote. At the time, I was satisfied with my answer. I thought it was personal, critical, relatable, and informative. But after being here in this space with you, creatives and intellectuals, I began to think more about what this origin story, this kind of ever since I can remember story actually looks like. My earliest memory of me is in Head Start. I was roughly 3 or 4 years old. My mother was a wonderful seamstress, and from time to time, she showed me these beautifully colored patterned jumpsuits, which is probably why I love jumpsuits and patterns today. She had style and made sure I was stylish too. So much so that one day, a little kid envied my style, took my new denim jacket, and decided he'd wear it home. My mother worked at the Head Start, so when it was time to go home for the day, I waltzed down to her classroom like I normally did, but she noticed something was off, noticed something was missing. Nervously, I told her about the little boy who had taken my jacket. And without skipping a beat, we hopped in the car and drove to what seemed like the end of the world, to this little boy's house. This was before cell phones, so there was no calling ahead. So we pulled up to the house unannounced, and my mother unafraid. I stayed in the car, and in what seems like only seconds, she emerged from the home brandishing my recovered jacket. She may as well have walked into a burning building and returned unharmed, because from that day, in my eyes, she was a superhero, and I was her sidekick. Although I couldn't articulate it at the time, essentially what my mother taught me on that day is first, not to let people take my things, but if they do, to be fearless and unapologetic in reclaiming it. In so many other ways, she taught me strength. She taught me audaciousness. She taught me to be my own person. Growing up, the world tried to undo my mother's teachings, and unfortunately, when I was younger, I was under the impression that my father was of that world. But it wasn't entirely his fault. He came from a long line of strict Southern Baptist pastors and deacons in the Mississippi Delta, all of whom I loved dearly, but had a very skewed view of what a little Black girl in this wicked world should be and do. No parts of their view matched the reality of the girl that I was becoming. They wanted me to be safe. All I wanted was to be free. I remember when I was in 8th grade, they announced cheerleader tryouts on the intercom at school. And I couldn't wait to get home and tell my parents how excited I was, how long I had longed to be a cheerleader. Without even thinking about it or missing a beat, my dad simply said no. That was his answer to a lot of my interests coming up. And my answer was usually to do it anyway. This time was no different. I tried out for the squad, made the squad, practiced with the squad for all of 3 months without my parents even knowing. But when it was time to go to Jamboree, I needed permission because we were going out of town, going to Jackson to perform. To keep from making this story too long, just know that I cried for what seemed like 40 days and 40 nights. refusing to go to bed, refusing to accept my dad's belief that something inherently bad was automatically going to happen to me if I cheered for boys, rode a bus with boys. After it seemed like I had literally cried a river, and probably because she wanted to get some sleep, but mostly because she had always been my hero, my mother eventually convinced me to retire for the night, gave me a hug, and promised that they'd talk it over and strongly consider allowing me to follow my passions. I'm proud to say that I cheered for 4 years in high school and 1 year in college, and in my senior year was captain of that same cheerleading squad. And nothing inherently bad ever happened. I can also recall a time shortly after receiving my license. I was washing my mother's car, the one that she graciously allowed me to drive on the rare occasion that I was allowed to leave the house for more than an hour. While washing the car, I turned on the radio, jammed out to the latest R&B and hip hop, and when my father happened to walk outside, Tupac was blaring from the car stereo. He looked at me disapprovingly and asked one solemn question. So what? You mean to tell me you want to be a thug girl? How I learned all of these songs, I still can't quite say because there was a block on the television in my room, and the only channel that I remember being blocked was actually BET. Still, I am proud to say that some 15 years later, an institution of higher learning actually paid me to be a thug girl. To teach classes on the likes of Tupac and others, to present research at conferences and symposiums like this one, even to write a book about it. As hip hop plays a profound role in my book, each of the titles actually are derived from hip hop and R&B songs. More recently, at the tender age of 29, after completing my PhD and earning my first tenure track job, I found myself faced with telling my father that one of his worst nightmares had come true. I was pregnant and unmarried. Of course, next to my now husband, my mother was the first person that I told, and she's been a superhero grandmother since that day. But telling my father, oh, that was a different story. I may as well have been that crying, snotty-nosed eighth grader all over again. Of course, this time he couldn't just tell me no, but he did tell me all the reasons for how I might be ruining my life. And then he didn't tell me anything at all. We actually didn't talk for several months after that. But again, I am happy to report that my life is not ruined. My son is 9 years old and thriving. And while being married is difficult, my husband and I make a conscious effort to make it work. And again, my dad and I have a wonderful relationship now, so much so that he and my mom actually drove the almost 2 hours to be here to support me today. And I want to say thank you to my mom and dad for loving me in spite of my rebelliousness, for whether you know it or not, individually molding me into the strong Black woman, the Maverick feminist that I am today. Thank you. I love you. So why am I telling you all of this? I share all of this to say again, I've been a Maverick feminist for as long as I can remember. I just didn't have the language to describe it when I was younger. Now that I have the language, I can tell you that I coined the term and the theory, Maverick feminism, with hope that it will dispel the myths concerning feminism and Black girl and womanhood, and give girls and women the language and tools to live out their truths, reclaim their everything, and express their humanities and sexualities unapologetically and safely, thereby improving their own lives and the lives of those around them. In the spirit of honesty, despite everything in my life telling me that I was, in fact, a feminist, I fought the term and the association for a very long time. It wasn't until I was sitting in a Black feminist thought class during my PhD journey at the University of Alabama that I finally acquiesced. If I am being completely honest, the course readings early on in the semester, including those of Anna Julia Cooper, Audre Lorde, Mary Church Terrell, and Beverly Goss Sheftall, amongst others, whom I now respect and honor dearly, did not immediately convince me that I should be gung-ho about joining the feminist bandwagon. It was not until I was introduced to Joan Morgan's memoir manifesto that I was redeemed. The unflinchingly provocative account of Morgan's journey to feminism, as detailed in When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, was for me, as it was for so many other young women, an entree into the world of Black feminisms. After completing only a few pages of the text, I opened myself up to be a willing vessel, and the Black feminist goddesses came down from heaven and welcomed me into the fold. I was reborn and began to remember the woman my mother had raised me to be, one with heightened confidence and minimal fears. Morgan's work with this hip-hop X prose, while not more valuable than the phenomenal feminist studied earlier in the course, simply spoke more effervescently to my Bougetto upbringing. It was like a breath of fresh air as it acknowledged that around the way girls had power and influence too. Her work helped me to gain an appreciation for its precursors and for those who would follow. I am cognizant that many girls and women, like my younger self, have never been encouraged to discuss and explore their sexualities, have relinquished or never knew that they had power, and are under the impression that feminism comes in a particular kind of packaging. It is my desire that my research, writing, speaking, and teaching will speak to the women in both the streets and the academy and offer hope concerning the growing divides between scholars and the communities in which we theorize. The genesis of Maverick feminism is grounded in a single question first posed by the father of the Harlem Renaissance, Alain Locke, in 1938. And later echoed by author and critic Nick Childs in 2006. Quote, but when will a Negro novelist of maturity who knows how to tell a story convincingly come to grips with motive fiction and social document fiction, end quote. Locke's question, a direct response to Hurston's seminal text, Their Eyes Are Watching God, prioritizes racial propaganda over all else, particularly Black female sexualities. Locke and his contemporaries demeaned explicit sexuality and mistook or ignored the significant role self-identification and self-sexualization played in the development of an individual, a community, and a race. Instead, they added sparks to the fire in the battle between popular and literary fiction. However, Maverick feminism offers a means to settle this feud and bridge the gap between highbrow and lowbrow, as it suggests that the terms are antiquated and that the personal or popular can likewise be socio-political, as these works too hold a mirror up to society and provide social commentary and political criticism. Maverick feminism is not a new type of feminism. Instead, it is an umbrella term comprising deviant Black feminisms, such as that envisioned by Joan Morgan, as well as those envisioned by radical feminists such as Audre Lorde, Alice Walker, Toni Cade Bambara, Barbara Smith, Gwendolyn Pugh, and the Crunk Feminist Collective. These types of feminism, whether declared lesbian feminism, womanism, hip-hop feminism, or crunk feminism, are forms of Maverick feminism, contingent upon independent thinking by women who do not conform to the accepted views, but are yet dedicated to the initial principles of Black feminism as outlined by Patricia Hill Collins' Black feminist thought. Resisting and obliterating the oppressions of racism, sexism, and classism, maintaining a humanist vision that will reject any human oppression, defining ourselves and speaking for those common Black women who may be voiceless, and finally, operating from a standpoint that acknowledges that the Black female experience is not monolithic, homogeneous, or uniform. Additionally, however, the primary tenet of Maverick feminism is the belief that a person must become self-identified, self-actualized, and self-sexualized before one can wholly and successfully participate in the obliteration of racist, sexist, classist, or ableist oppressions, amongst others. The development of these characteristics is not an innate trait entrenched in all Black women or all Black feminists for that matter. They are learned and taught traits, either through experiences of trauma or positive connections with communities of already learned Black women. This theory, of course, prefers the latter and posits an intergenerational method reminiscent of Angela Davis's lift as we climb theory, and therefore acknowledges that one individual's ascension toward empowerment should result in the ascension of many others. The goal is to enlighten and embolden others in hopes of shielding them from physical and mental attacks, those from bigoted systems of oppression, as well as those from individual tyrants, and to ultimately improve the systems that impact the well-beings of Black women, men, children, and individuals of marginalized communities. In my book, I applied Maverick feminism to several fiction and nonfiction texts and determined that the Black characters that I analyzed use their sexualities as a means of self-improvement, activism, and communal growth. I find that these women often reject respectability politics and other conventions that tend to tame African Americans, specifically African American women, by limiting their personal satisfaction and joy, thereby pushing already marginalized groups even further into the margins. At the heart of each chapter, with the exception of chapter 3, is a comparative analysis of two fictional works centering on Black women's developing sexualities. These analyses highlight the importance of sisterhoods and intergenerational dynamics and are foregrounded and supported by popular culture productions. Furthermore, I end each chapter by examining a memoir penned by a Black woman who admittedly rejected respectability politics on account of its joy-stifling potentials. As you will see from the chapter titles, again inspired by hip-hop and R&B songs, and the text selections, a mixture of recognized highbrow and lowbrow works, although again, I don't like those distinctions. The organization of each chapter serves as a direct response to Locke's question concerning Hurston's supposed misuse of a cradle gift. The ability to be human, to evoke the culture, and to tell a story convincingly. Ultimately, I contend that the separation of literature from lives is at the base of the false categorization dividing, quote, serious literature from popular texts, as literary and cultural studies both affirm and improve the lives of Black women. In the first chapter, titled Dirty Computers, Girlhood and Sexual Desires, I argue that the very sexual protagonists in Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God and Sister Soldiers, The Coldest Winter Ever, attempt to operate as Maverick feminists and are influential in the growth of other Black women as a direct result of their self-identified and or self-sexualized mentalities. However, because both Janie and Winter operate in a society where an overt sexuality is seemingly punishable, the protagonists, like their authors, are banished to some form of imprisonment by the end of their respective narrative. Hence, while the works are undoubtedly groundbreaking and the depictions of Black female sexualities portrayed in them add depth and diversity to the body of criticism on Black female sexualities, they are also ultimately representatives of the societal two-ness imposed upon the Black female body during the 16th and 17th century. I offer Brittany Cooper's critical memoir, Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower, as a non-fictional account of the debilitating impact of respectability politics. The main characters analyzed in chapter 2, titled Be Careful With Me, Sexual Violence, Safety, and Pleasure, are the exact opposites of those analyzed in chapter 1, as Seeley of Alice Walker's The Color Purple and Precious Jones of Sapphire's Push are not self-identified or self-sexualized, and early on lack a desire for sexual pleasure. Both also lack education and are mentally, physically, and sexually abused by their respective father figure. This type of sexual trauma has often been a focal point in Black feminist thought. However, this chapter centralizes the fact that these characters are defined not by their trauma, but by their sexual revolutions. By the novel's end, the protagonists are attached to communities of women who possess and help the characters develop necessary tools for freedom, namely self-identification, self-sexualization, and self-actualization. A freedom that is taken away from the protagonists examined in the previous chapter. To further demonstrate the interconnectedness of sisterhood, sexuality, and progression, I also analyzed the film versions of this chapter's two primary texts and determined that the novel's protagonists develop and become more complicated characters than their film counterparts as a direct result of their explicit, intimate experiences and engagement with others. Then, to provide a non-fictional representation of this dilemma, I offer Roxane Gay's memoir, Hunger, a Memoir of My Body. Gay endured physical and sexual abuse and suffers from past and present shames. Her work's acknowledgement of continued sufferings magnifies a purpose of chapter 2, which is to illustrate that a sensual education is equally important to the overall well-being of African American women and girls as a conventional education. Chapter 3, Get Information, Sisterhood and the Intergenerational Dynamic, serves as a representation of what is initially lacking in the lives of the main characters in chapters 1 and 2. In chapter 3, I conduct a close reading of Terry McMillan's Getting to Happy to articulate the ways in which an intentional sisterhood or intergenerational dynamic can personally fulfill the women involved while propelling political and social agendas. The novel both revisits and reunites the four charismatic and driven women from Waiting to Exhale, but the general purpose of Getting to Happy is to express that, quote, times have changed, end quote. To demonstrate these changing times and the need to be proactive, Macmillan uses the outspoken and unapologetic offspring of the four protagonists to highlight the importance of reversing one's past and understanding one's present in order to be productive and happy in one's future. Historically, young Black women have been compelled to think of other Black women as competition, and older Black women have often thought of the young as ill-informed and incapable of leading. However, Macmillan's Getting to Happy demonstrates the reward in finding a common ground, or a space in the median where both entities can equally soar while working towards a common goal of alleviating oppressions. On the surface, the happy medium idea may appear too idealistic and seemingly unsophisticated, but ultimately, this chapter is confirmation that the happy medium approach is undoubtedly more beneficial to and representative of the avant-garde, diverse, and continuously changing world in which we live, operate, and theorize. Finally, as the previous two chapters, I call upon the lived experiences of Black women to validate the claims depicted in the fictional works. Red Table Talk, a Facebook original web series starring Jada Pinkett Smith and her mother and daughter, foregrounds the chapter and demonstrates the power and evolution that result from tackling life's enterprises via critical, honest, and open dialogue with female companions. Michelle Obama's memoir, Becoming, also helps to dispel myths about respectability and supports the idea that participation in a sisterhood or intergenerational relationship is beneficial for all involved. Overall, in this book, I argue that respectability politics has long since been a matter of accommodating others while neglecting self. And the literary works evaluated in this project unapologetically express the individual and communal detriment that is caused as a result of this neglect. Hurston's Janie, Soldier's Winter, Walker's Silly, Sapphire's Precious, Macmillan's Sparrow, neither of these girls or women would be considered a role model because they display Maverick-like characteristics instead. A maverick is considered an outsider, a person who is unorthodox and unconventional, a nonconformist. A model is an imitation, something or someone that is mass produced by a system of power. Black feminists such as Anna Julia Cooper, the Combahee River Collective, Audre Lorde, and Angela Davis have for over a century urged Black women to explore the self and to, quote, learn not only about the objective forces at work in the society in which we live, but also about the intensely social character of their interior lives, end quote. With this book, I have attempted to answer that call and encourage others to do the same. Ultimately, I argue that Black women, and by and large the Black community, will only be both free and fulfilled when everyone relinquishes the strongholds of respectability politics and no longer subscribe to the caricatures placed before the Black race by 16th and 17th century European explorers and colonists, who undoubtedly saw the gold mines living within our bodies and desperately hoped that we never would. What I have shared with you today is just a few examples of how, in my teaching, my research, and my writing, I am working towards this freedom. And I hope that each of you in this room will pick up the baton, if you have not done so already, and do the work with me. Because I have been inspired by all of the creatives here at this symposium, I wanted to end my piece by reading a poem by Alice Walker, a poem that I think exemplifies Maverick feminism. It comes from her work, Revolutionary Petunias, and is titled, Be Nobody's Darling. Be nobody's darling. Be an outcast. Take the contradictions of your life and wrap around you like a shawl, to parry stones, to keep warm. Watch the people succumb to madness with ample cheer. Let them look askance at you, and you askance reply. Be an outcast. Be pleased to walk alone, uncool, or line the crowded riverbeds with other impetuous fools. Make a merry gathering on the bank where thousands perish for brave hurt words, they said. But be nobody's darling, be an outcast, qualified to live amongst the dead. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I think we have some time for questions.
I want to
Hi.
say, I could not put your book down last night. I was reading it and then I said, oh my gosh, it's 2:00. But what I wanted to ask you about had to do with, the identity of being a Black feminist in relation to other feminists, such as white feminists, and how you see the position of Black feminists in relation to others. As I know, it's a distinct, we have our distinct issues as Black feminists, but how do you see us ever integrating with the call of other feminists of color or white feminists? How do you see our roles in as Black feminists? Should we continue just focusing on Black feminist issues, or should we also try to work in community? Did that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And thank you. I'm glad to hear that you are enjoying the book. I'm always glad when somebody's reading it. But to answer your question, so I mentioned growing up in this predominantly Black neighborhood. I went to an HBCU for undergrad, but both of my master's and my PhD degrees were at predominantly white institutions. My first tenure track job and now my second tenure track job are also at predominantly white institutions. So while I was actually revising this book and at my first institution in North Carolina, I was the only African American in my department. But my colleagues were the most awesome people I had ever met. They were all women with the exception of one. And the English department was known on campus as the rebellious department. So anytime any matters on the campus needed to be discussed, they hated to see us actually coming to the meetings because they know that we would have lots of questions, that we would critique any of the laws or any of the policies that were being created and passed down. And I appreciated that so much about my department. It got to a point where we actually had to start deciding who would be the spokesperson for the department at each meeting so that the same person wasn't going up and seeming to be the troublemaker the entire time. But again, while I was revising this book, I had so much support from my colleagues who were white women and also identify as feminists and helped me to actually think through and articulate the ways in which we can actually work together, how they can be allies. In fact, they have actually inspired some of my own activism. So I know that in the beginning, so to speak, Black women were not allowed a seat at the feminist table. So we had to kind of create our own spaces. But I do think that we are living in a time that if we are not resistant, we can definitely work together to accomplish the goals. I hope that that answered your question. Thank you. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. You can definitely ask me questions later if you like.
Hi. You had said that you have always been a feminist and you just, when you were young, you didn't have the language to express that feminism. What kind of advice would you give to aspiring writers to find their own voice and also to voice out their own literary activism in a world of trending topics and genre writing?
Well, thank you for that question. I appreciate that you are so engaged in all of the talks. So I guess my advice would be similar to advice that other authors have actually shared. So I mentioned that in order to actually assist in obliterating the oppressions of others, we first need to do our own self-reflective work. So you need to be able to reflect upon your experiences, think critically about how they have impacted you as a person before you are able to go out and essentially do the work because like I said, it is very important that we know who we are and who we want to be before we can actually help to obliterate that particular oppression. So I think I answered your question, but again, be fearless. Like someone else said, you have your own story. Although others can relate, no one has the exact same story as you. If it's important, and all of our stories are important, then definitely you should share it unapologetically. Thank you.
Our next reader is Christian J. Collier. Christian J. Collier's Greater Ghost is a wise, expansive examination of grief on the personal and public levels, with its ghosts present not only in the content of its poems, but in a writing style that powerfully evokes the ephemerality of both life and grief, and the sense of hazy distance that we feel from those we have lost. In an interview with Electric Lit, Collier mentions, "When I'm working on poems, I come at it from a perspective that I'm essentially a director behind the camera, and I'm crafting a particular shot for whoever is on the other side of it. I want the audience to see and feel something very specific, but I also want to leave a little bit of room for them to walk around and fill in some of the blanks. I want them to feel a little bit of that tension, that danger. And through the speaker of these poems, Collier guides us to a contemplation of our own griefs, both as individuals and as a nation. Christian J. Collier is a Black Southern writer, arts organizer, and teaching artist from Chattanooga who is completing his MFA in creative writing here at the W. He's the author of the chapbook, The Gleaming of the Blade, the 2021 editor's selection from Bull City Press. His work has appeared in The Atlantic, Poetry, December, and elsewhere. A 2015 Loft Spoken Word Immersion Fellow, he is also the winner of the 2022 Porch Prize in Poetry and the 2020 Pro Forma Contest from Grist Journal, and has served on the editorial staff of Ponder Review and Poetry South. Please help me welcome Christian J. Collier and his debut full-length poetry collection, Greater Ghost, to the stage.
Hey, everybody. If I do this right, it's not painful for everybody. So let's see how successful I am. Is that good? Can you guys hear me? Sweet. So I'm really excited to be here. I had the great honor and privilege of bringing in my birthday yesterday. And so I had to take that, death. But I had the ability to be in the presence of great art and artists, and I'm really appreciative of that. And thank you, Dr. Dunkelberg, for all the things, and also like rescuing me last night. So as a rule of thumb, things become more complicated when I come around. And so after we left the gala last night, something happened where my GPS was probably leading me to my murder, and then randomly, I'm stopped on this corner trying to figure out where I'm supposed to be. And I notice a vehicle kind of come and stop, and then it doesn't move. And I'm like, well, I'm a Black man in Mississippi. It's dark. And there's a vehicle that I don't know what's about to happen. So I just kind of like look over. And it was Dr. Dunkelberg in like the W van. He's like, hey, Christian, you need a ride? I was like, yes, I should. So came in clutch. So we are officially, well, we've been in it, but we are in the trenches of, as the kids say, spooky season. So are you guys, anybody fans of like horror movies? Okay, a couple of you guys. All right. So let's try it one more time. Okay, I'm not touching it again. I'm a big fan of horror movies, and there's like a theme a little bit that kind of runs through some of the stuff that I'm going to read to you. So, and this was actually a sign. I took it as a sign from the Almighty that yesterday morning when I woke up and I turned on the television in the hotel, that after the very long DraftKings infomercial went off, it was a Friday the 13th marathon. So it's like, oh snap! I know what I'm gonna do. So there is a movie came out in the late 80s called Friday the 13th Part 8. Jason Takes Manhattan, right? So anybody see that movie? Okay. I mean, that's debatable. But so if you haven't seen it, basically like there's a school trip, a high school trip, graduation, and through some, shenanigans, Jason Voorhees gets resurrected and he gets aboard the ship, and then, like mayhem ensues. However, here's kind of the kicker. About like the last third of the film takes place in Manhattan. So I've seen that movie like a whole bunch of times, but I'm watching this in like maybe 2019. And it dawns on me that even though they're in New York, there's really like one black character in the movie, right? I was like, "Ooh, okay, well, so I'm watching the movie, but something interesting happens. So um, I grew up in the era where there was always the trope that if you saw somebody black in a horror film, you knew he's not going to make it, and he might not make it, past the credits, the beginning credits, right? So I'm watching this, and the one black character is named Julius Gaul, and for some reason he's a boxer because those were common in high school. Um, so Julius is about that action. Julius, like he makes it well into the film. When they get to New York, they make that horrible decision to split up. And Julius finds himself on top of this building, and he turns around and he sees Jason, right? So we know the end is coming for Julius, but Julius does not try to run. Julius squares up and he fights Jason Voorhees. And I was like, oh, wow. Like it's never like really hit me like this before that this is, and again, this is like the 80s. This is before Jordan Peele and Get Out and all that. This is somebody who's bucking the trope, right? So I told my wife, I was like, I'm going to start writing poems about black characters in horror films, just as a joke. And then like a couple of days later, I started into this poem. So, oh, we're good. So here's what you need to know. Not much. I've pretty much given you most of what you need. It does have Julius's last words in it. And there's a because I don't want to like scare children, so I'm not going to say it, but just know that it's like Samuel Jackson's favorite word, right? So, and actually, this isn't in Greater Ghost. This is in my chapbook, Leaving with the Blade. So, this is like a teaser. Elegy for Julius Gaul. Even though I've seen the scene well over 30 times and know how it ends, I still have hope in my cells. This will be the time some miracle will reach through the screen and save him. Though he faced death on the ashen clavicle of that Manhattan building before the lone audience of the moon, he will somehow will his exhausted body into slipping that fatal Sunday punch to escape free, unsmudged and alive. Perhaps it is just the world refusing to let me be, to stay out of my head for the runtime of the film, but I also cannot help thinking about the other Black boys not hired by a casting director to be rendered headless on film. Those now forever anchored to being young, whose families were elected by the god of circumstance to carry the murders of their sons or fathers or brothers the remainder of their days. How many times have I seen the soul of someone Black exit the pores of their tiny mosques of muscle and flesh, vacating this life? Each of their final moments, a horror film I did not pay to see and cannot let go of. In some way, isn't this the nature of being Black in America? Always residing so close to terror, we are wounded, but never surprised when it pitches one of us into the limbo of its maw. Me, I want the alternate ending. Not just for Julius, but for all the other young Black men buried in my brain, each one tucked into the pink soil of my mind. I want the alternate ending. A burst of lightning blossoms and brings them life again, and they gaze into the Black eyes of their fates and say, take your best shot, before punching their hands bloody, staving off the afterlife's hungry invitation. I want the alternate ending where they find their ways back into the graces of their most loved. In the distance, night bleeds away, and a brand new beginning sets upon them. As the credits cascade down the screen, the language left on their breath is the antithesis of horror, of anything close to horror. Thank you. So, Greater Ghost has been out for a little bit over a month now, so it's still like baby fresh and brand new. And does anybody like, well, how many people have read it? Perfect. So I have like the honor of like kind of introducing you to the world. So the whole thing really is about interrogating ghosts, right? Because each of us who's in here right now when we came through these doors, each of us brought a certain number of ghosts in here with us, right? And it's not all just people who've passed away. Sometimes it's like, man, like a good number of us in here right now, if like your phone went off and a certain person from your past like DM'd you or texted you or whatever, you'd be like, oh, okay, well, we might have a future here. You know, that's a ghost that you carry into the rooms that you enter, right? So I wanted to interrogate the different ghosts that we kind of carry around with us, but also like I personally carry around with me. So this one is called the Compline. And Compline is just like a night prayer, right? Between us, wait, okay, so pause. Louisiana people? Okay, hello, you are my folks. I'm not sure if this translates to like Mississippi, but are you guys familiar with what haints are? Haints? Okay, you guys came ready. All right, never mind. All right, Le Compline. Between us, there are 101 umber haints in our home. In bed, we discuss our future, our children woven in myrrh, sitting in some tomorrow, waiting for us to join and give them our science so they can live. I tell her what I fear. I will walk into fogged, writhen woods and die when our babies are too young to carry my baritone with them. I'll become the almost stranger they hear their mother's prayers paint the night sky for. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh parents every day. Love is no shield against his mighty ginger hand or will. Even language passes away. Even the bouquet of vowels and syllables collected each year can be swept from the scaly floor of the tongue. All stories end in death if we are honest with ourselves and how the world works. If I am being honest, when I eventually hear my love sleeping by my side, the gloom, whisper to God, ask that he spare me the escape, the emptying out of the marigold lights for many years. I ask that when it finally comes, I not go before I know all I've set my heart upon will live on well without me. I ask him to forgive my selfish maw for having the nerve to call out his name and flood his holy ear with the word more. Thank you. So, punk rock fans? Oh, okay. More so this side. No judgment this side. So when I was a teenager, so for like the younger folks in here, there used to be a time when like people would go to a place and like buy music. So I would go and then I would like buy, records, just like interesting things. Like the cover looked interesting if I might have, seen a video. So there used to be a thing called music videos. So you would turn on the television and they would show you like things and you would, oh. So there is a band from El Paso, Texas called At the Drive-In. And in the year of our Lord 2000, they put out a record called Relationship of Command. And even if you don't like punk rock, if you've ever wanted to be punched in the chest by a Buick in the best possible way, it is this record. It is all killer, no filler. You will thank me later. But there's a song on the record called Quarantine. And then the chorus, Cedric Bixler, the lead singer, says, a single spark can start a spectral fire. And I was like, oh man, that's like just a dope line. And so that has been in my head since I was like 16 years old. So in terms of writing this particular poem, I was like, I think I'm gonna try to put like spectral in there somewhere. So this is called In the Spectral Hour. At the foot of her hospital bed, I became my mama's god while she was sick, battling infection. I wondered as I struggled to keep her fed and in minimal pain, who would keep her safe when she left me? If she crossed over before my hazel eyes, who would walk with her to the bronze palace where all souls sleep? Whose hands would part the alarm-thick air and usher her over the thin, damp threshold of this plane and into the honeyed lights? When she threw up after eating for the first time in 3 days, I thought of how my grandmother told her my cousin came to visit. My cousin who died arrived and said he would soon return to take her between the pearl-rimmed stars. She could abandon her worry. I wanted that to be the way it works for everyone. The slow fade into soundlessness, the hushing of lamps. I wanted to ask if she feared what was coming, the changing of the scene, the slimming of the leaves, the softening of the meat for forever's consumption. I swallowed the notion. Whenever my mama talked, I watched the shade draw closer, each step making her vanish. Thank you. So anybody else like afraid of flying? Okay. You guys who did not raise your hand, you are so stunningly blessed. I was once one of your people. And so like and if I knew, this is the thing about like youth, you operate so much off of hubris. And when you get older, you're like, man, I was just like completely out of my head. So if I knew I was going to fly somewhere, like the week leading up to having to get on the plane and go, I would listen to, or I would watch like at least one Final Destination movie. So if you're not familiar, if you're not a horror person, there's a movie franchise called Final Destination where basically like a bunch of teens somehow avoid like a catastrophic disaster and then like death comes back for like revenge on them. So I would watch at least one of them. And the first one is like totally about an airplane exploding, right? So just playing in the face of death. And then about 9 years ago, I was being flown up to Minnesota. It was, as fate would have it, Friday the 13th. And I'm put in first class. So I'm like, oh man, I'm like Mayor McCheese. I'm living the dream. So we get about halfway there. And for some reason, the thought hits me. I was like, depending on how the plane goes down, I'm one of the first to kind of like get it, right? So like if it goes down like this, it's like the pilots, maybe like a couple of flight attendants, then like me, you know? So I'm wondering, like, but what do you do? Like, if you know, like, you're not going to make it, right? Like the things come down, you're not like the flight attendant's crying, you're not going to make it. You know it. What do you do? And I'm like, do you call like the person that you love? Like, you're like, we're not going to make it, Sarah, like always. But I'm like, but you haunt that person for the rest of her life, right? Or their life. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of but do you call somebody that you hate? You're like, I never liked you, Chuck. You know what I mean? Like, but maybe that guy's like, good, I'm glad you're, like, I don't know, it's so all of that like really like warped my mind. And then there's a Denzel Washington movie called Flight, and that destroyed me. So like fueled by cocaine and like booze, he manages to like save these people from like well, I mean, they still have the accident, but he saves some lives, right? But man, just seeing like the fluke way that plane went down. Ooh, so from the moment I get on an airplane, I have to occupy all of my time. So all that's to say that there are a couple of poems here that are about flight, and here we go. This is called Leaving the Earth. As we gallop down the runway and scale cloud-peppered sky, I chant the 7 names of my airborne dead and feel them close. They see me shudder at the thought of becoming one of them, the unbreathing. I admit I never get nearer to God than when I wish not to join him. My God, I hate leaving any party before I'm ready, before I've had my fill of white rum or cake. I'm not prepared for the doors to shut and lock. I've so loved this sun-grown globe, each minute bit I've been served, I fear letting go, being snagged from it like a sailfish snared through the mouth and yanked from its saltwater bath. My brother told me long ago there is no heaven, but instead an indigo hole, a grand nothing awaiting each of us once we've run out of clocks. I've never learned what to do with time. The days archived, the shelled portion of hours I have left in the taut canvas around my belly. I don't know how anybody dies easy, how they reach willingly for the starlit ladder, how they do it without a protest bluing their tongue. I am afraid I don't know how to go anywhere calm-blooded. All I know is how not to be slain or make any room I enter a man-made shrine to house my corpse. Thank you. So I mentioned that there's like a horror theme kind of running through these. There's a movie that came out in 2015 called It Follows. So I like putting things in here that, you know, they're kind of for me, and maybe like, you know, you guys get it like a little bit later. So this is called It Follows. What more is there to say? I don't want to make it about the 9mm round or the starless hour. Heart caught the bullet, but and sagged, but it broke through all the fine china in his chest. It broke him down to the booze-drenched floorboards when it ricocheted back out. When he passed, he transformed into something painted in parched blood. I couldn't draw him back in my memory without also inviting how he left me. I'm already full of so much remembrance, so much smog and traffic on my road. I am a stone mausoleum at all times, and where those unable to breathe with me. It's always the things I can't hold on to that refuse to give me up. Always the things never meant to stay that never leave. Anything unable to be escaped from is a prison, even the body, even being human, even being. This is the very nature of how a stain works. One object marks and muddies another to the point where it'll never be made clean or whole again. Beyond the surface of a thing, it punctures past the white meat. The wound remains an open border. Thank you. So in 2019, I was flying to New Hampshire, and so now we've you know identified that I am like terrified of being in the air. So I'm in Charlotte. We're getting ready to like take off, and then there's like a storm that comes. And so we wait on the tarmac forever. And there's like these two kids are behind me, just like going nuts, as like small children do. And so finally the captain comes on and he's like, it's still storming pretty bad, but it's gonna be okay. We're gonna get on top of it. And I'm like, I've never heard of this. Okay, here we go. So we take off and we go up, and then we keep going up, and then we go up some more. Like we were so high, like I swear I saw like an alien. It was crazy. And we are so high that you can see where lightning stops in the air, right? Like where lightning begins or ends, or whatever. So the woman next to me, she taps me on the shoulder, and she's like, it's lightning. And I'm like, yeah, it is lightning. Yes, I see it. She's like, are we supposed to be flying when there's lightning? I'm like, lady, I have no idea. I'm barely keeping it together. So thankfully we made it. And I got this poem out of it. This is called Beloved. We were riding the back end of a Charlotte thunderstorm, sailing through a galaxy of black and ash, lightning blooming briefly around us when it struck me. There isn't much difference between beauty and the ominous. Then, as the 5-year-olds behind me chanted about their hunger, it occurred to me, if God in his millennial pink heaven above wished it so, those dancing bolts could cleave the plane's abdomen and chuck us from the sky. If that were to happen, you would have sent me off into the unknown, all souls someday arriving, knowing without question I was loved, holy. The way a famished fire washes over a building's flesh and marrow. You baptized me even before I boarded. You gave me 5 white envelopes I folded and placed in my jacket pocket, each containing a letter you penned to remind me, no matter where I went, no matter if the plane plowed into some simple marvel of the earth, ending all of us aboard in one deafening stroke, I was divined by you, made angel already. Thank you. So I got, this is like your two poem warning. I'm not sure if this translates to anywhere outside of the South, but I think in the South we tend to believe that the people that we love the most who pass away, that we kind of carry them with us in some way, right? And so this is a poem about that. This is called Blood. The last word my love speaks before we hang up becomes a sustained G sharp in my head until next door I hear water running as if down and over the smooth backs of several stones the size of a child's skull. And in its song, my grandmother's voice crests the percussion, says, "Come with me." And we are both in stride, the divots in our palms now small ponds as we walk across the sodden collar of the grass above the casket where she sleeps. I ask if it was true she once put a bullet in my grandfather for keeping time with another woman. She says, yes, and I do it again. I step into a slight hollow. The water slips between my fingers and becomes fresh polish upon the turf. I apologize. I ask if I've disappointed her by not being more alert. She says, I have seen the secrets you keep as railroad ties beneath your tongue. I love you the same as I always have. When I mention my love, my wish she was alive to meet her, she says, I already have. What you don't understand is my life begins again every day you offer up the hymn of your breath. Baby, we are blood, and blood is the oldest God any of us can look to and always find. The gospel of this is something time can never touch, the good news that does not die. Thank you. All right, folks, this is it. Hope you have some good questions. I'll be judging you. And even if you're just like, hey, like, what are some horror movies I should watch? You know, like, I like talking to folks. So there is a song by a blues musician by the name of Blind Willie Johnson. And the song is Jesus Make Up My Dying Bed. And so I was thinking about the blues, which is like a very surreal musical form, right? And I know that like some people, it's kind of become one of those things where people are like, oh, but no, it's like super duper surreal because you could be like, I was on my way to Mabel's house and then the devil jumped out and we had a battle and you know, you're like, so that was like really fresh in my mind. And Terrence Hayes said once in an interview that he's just trying to write poems to sound like music, right? One of my favorite poets is a guy by the name of John Murillo. And John says that when poems are kind of like operating at their height, they are part cinema, part song, right? So this is my attempt at getting into the weeds of that. And this is called In the Time of Dying, Meet Me. Father of mass and air pressure, turbulent altitude and dude skyline, if these burgundy wings carry me across your vulture-strewn puce road should weaken, should fail, please descend with me. Just once, borrow a tenor and talk to make my plummet an easy sprint towards sea sand floor. Bend low your busy ear so my last asks of you land intact. My uncle, King Cobra on his breath, once said, anyone who stays in the wind too long never leaves it behind. Let it be true. Let me be both here and not here completely. Let some of me be 9 black hickory leaves jitterbugging on the proud curving lip of any given gust. Let me be story in that way. When these tense lungs struggle no more our work, when I am man no longer, new in shape beyond blood and gland, let my utter name be a blue note lanterning my love's voices from time to time. Anoint what red dirt of me is left through him, Father. Let me be occasional music after shh. Thank you. All right, folks, questions, comments?
Hello, that was so great. Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about if you view some of those poems that are using horror movies as like ekphrasis, or if it's more just about you like responding to the film, or how you view that. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's always on a poem by poem basis, right? Because I think that I have probably about like 5 poems that are based on the Black characters in horror films, right? Which is more traditionally like on the nose. But Some of the other things I think just kind of provide like an atmosphere for me to get into. And I still think that, depending on how stringently you look at, ekphrasis and everything, it's in the neighborhood of that, just because it's in some way in conversation with like another piece of art. And I like that because I think pop culture has become something that, thanks to like Roxane Gay and thanks to Kiese Layman and Damon Young and people like that, we've been able to look at in a more critical light with the course of the past couple of years. And I think that it's a way for people who aren't like, I am under no impression that everybody loves poems, right? I've been awake in this world long enough to realize that it's really not like the jam for a lot of people, and that's totally fine. But I think that by kind of writing these things that get into conversation with pop culture, it is a way to bring people who aren't necessarily going to sit down and read like John Ashbery, but maybe they'll check out something if like, here's this Hanifa Durkee poem where he talks about Drake, right? Maybe that's their starting point to kind of work their way back and see some of these things that, have existed before. So yeah, for me, it's always just kind of like how I feel and where the work wants to go. And, but that's something that I'm kind of always cognizant of how can I bring the world into the work.
We're all doing our best to walk around each other. Okay, since you mentioned John Ashbery, you've been talking about other types of media, cinematography, and music. I'm always really interested in our poetic lineages, how we get to where we are. Can you talk about some of the people you see as like your hereditary lineage inside poetics?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, how much time do we have? So like one of the things that's got in my life is Tennyson's poem Ulysses, where there's the line, "I'm a part of all that I've met." Right. So all of it in some way like informs the sum. And if you're just like, "Ooh, I'm never gonna write a thing like that," it's all in there somewhere. But I think and I think this is the thing about kind of like having a lineage, is that your lineage always grows, right? So I love Yusuf Kamanyaka, Sharon Olds, Anne Sexton. Those are some of like my old tried and true goats. Jericho Brown over the past couple of years has really become somebody I enjoy. I mentioned John Murillo, and I think that whoever gives, I think, and I know I've talked to like some of you guys the past couple of days about like permissions. Permissions is one of like my go-to words, but whoever gives you permission, like to just open another door and walk through it, that's somebody that, kind of switches on a light for you. And it's just like, hey, here you go. So I'm always interested in people who are, and it's not always like text, it's a lot of stuff from visual media, like Mark Bradford, visual artist Mark Bradford has become like probably like my biggest influence for the course of the past 5 years, right? So completely changed the way that I write and approach everything. And but yeah, just whoever's giving me those permissions are causing me to think or rethink in a way that I've not, either like been honed or allowed myself to think. So yeah. So if you're not familiar with those people, write them all down now. Anybody else? Oh. I thought you guys were gonna like brawls for a second.
Hi.
Hey.
This may be kind of a collective question from our discussion in the MFA class about your poetry. And we talked about a technique that you use when maybe refining your lines, about being able to start not just from the top. Would you mind exploring that technique of your craft with us?
Sure. Yeah. So I, again, like Mark Bradford. So Mark Bradford was somebody who, if you're not familiar with Mark Bradford, he's like 6'7" and he's like gay and black and it's just like fantastic. But he makes these elaborate pieces, like huge, right? And he doesn't use paint. He uses like often end papers from like beauty shops, right? So, and he uses that in water. So he'll build them up, and then he'll break out like the pressure washer. He'll just like start mowing it down and pulling things off of it and everything. And he said in an interview that often I don't know what I'm going for until I start pulling the guts of it out. So I'm watching this and I thought, what would happen if I used the same logic to text? And as soon as I thought that, all the doors open, right? So I see text as being a completely malleable thing. Like a finished poem might not be finished with what it has to say or what it can say. So let me like gut that, I'll throw it in something else and everything. So, but now when I'm working on a poem and it's in a state of at least being draft ready, what I do is I start at the very bottom line, and then I start arranging my line breaks to kind of follow logic, right? And build out the narrative. Because if I can read it from the top to the bottom and it lines up, but if I read it from the last line to the top and it lines up, then maybe if you are somebody who's like, I like this poem, let me see what else it can say, then you get like two poems in one. And maybe if I start doing that in some other ways, then kind of like Tying Bajess, you get like poems that you can read 7 different ways, right? So each time that you are coming to the page, you are being rewarded for your time and attention, right? Wow. So I use that as a way to kind of edit, because if something's kind of like wonky, I'm like, well, maybe I need to apply some pressure here to kind of like try to buff this out a little bit. But I think that it's a way to, just kind of stretch out and see what else you can do as an artist. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy. And I think for editing, it's kept me pretty sharp, I think.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right, Morgan.
Hey again. So you deal with grief a lot in this collection, and I was just curious, do you use the action of writing poetry more so to escape in the moment or more so to reflect afterwards?
Can you repeat the last part? To escape?
To either escape in the moment, like during the time of grief, or when you begin to heal to reflect back onto it.
I don't think I go to writing to escape. In the past 5 years, especially, when I show up to write, 9 times out of 10, I'm showing up without any intention or expectation of what's going to appear. I'm more interested in just getting interesting text, and I'll put it in a Word document, and after so many lines or time, like I'll start moving things around just to kind of going for interesting combinations. And after a while, if I get something like, oh, okay, that sounds neat, I start applying pressure narratively, but I think living I think living in a particular way does the work of, because I think even my definition of healing, like I think when we think of healing, at least maybe in like the West, like we think that this happened, I've healed, and now I'm over that thing. And I think that for anybody who's endured like trauma or like real like pronounced grief, like my cousin was murdered in like 2014, right? I will never get over that. There are a number of other things that have happened that I know I'm never going to get over those things, right? But I think the best that we can hope for is building enough muscle where we can live beside those things. And I think that's the more interesting work, is how can I acknowledge that this thing is there? Again, like these are all ghosts. How can I acknowledge that it's there and live beside it? And then from time to time when I'm having one of those days where, let it have its space, because I think that, again, I think we think that we are beyond the thing where we should not feel sad. I shouldn't cry anymore, that whatever. No, you need to, your body is telling you, hey, it's cry time. Have that moment and then, keep living. And I think that just the process of that kind of internal work has changed the way that I exist as a human, which also changes the way that I approach diving into some of these harder things that I've endured. Sweet. Thank you.
All right, our final reader for the symposium this year is Steve Yates. Steve Yates' fourth novel, The Lakes of Southern Hollow, is an engaging coming-of-age tale that skillfully weaves in topical and eternal topics, including love, lust, music and fame, religion, politics, religion in politics, addiction, and economic stress, all on the cusp of the pandemic. As we follow Casey, Devin, and Tyndall through their final year of high school in Springfield, Missouri, the close insight of the narrative and the strength of these characters' voices keeps readers deeply invested in their trials and triumphs. As the Hattiesburg American put it in a review of this book, Yates plunders the young adult genre boldly and with punkish verve. There's not an aspect of American teenage life that he doesn't confront head on. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll? Check, check, and check. The notable surprise is his deft treatment of faith, a fair and balanced subject of sincere teen inquiry instead of the usual jack of all jokes. Given today's political climate, that's his boldest career move to date. Steve Yates was raised in Springfield, Missouri, the setting of the Lakes of Southern Hollow. His other books include the novels Morgan's Quarry, The Teeth of the Souls, and The Legend of the Albino Farm, the novella Sandy and Wayne, and Some Kinds of Love, stories. For his fiction, Yates is the recipient of a grant from the Arkansas Arts Council and thrice the recipient of grants from the Mississippi Arts Commission. 2 for fiction, 1 for nonfiction. His short stories have appeared in Tri-Quarterly, Southwest Review, Texas Review, Laurel Review, Western Humanities Review, Turnstile, Harrington Gay Men's Literary Quarterly, Valley Voices, and elsewhere. He serves as Associate Director / Marketing Director of the University Press of Mississippi. Please help me welcome Steve Yates and the Lakes of Southern Hollow to the stage.
Thank you, Matt, for that wonderful introduction. As Matt continued, I thought, oh, he did the research. Those are stories I haven't thought about in a long, long time. I want to thank Kendall for inviting me and thank Kim Whitehead for shepherding us and guiding us all around. And, let's give a cheer of thanks to the tireless and irrepressible Cheyenne from the bookstore who sold us all these wonderful books. Wow. Think about tearing down every night and taking your whole pop-up store away and then waking up really early and coming back and doing it again and then going to a gala and doing it again. That's wonderful. We write fiction for many reasons. Since I work sometimes 50 hours a week as a publisher, I have to be passionate, even consumed about characters, who they are, what do they want, what are they willing to do to get it, to really finish anything of my own writing. So with this book, one driving obsession was this. I wanted to write an evangelical Christian character who was not a fool and not a foil and not a hypocrite, a character like some of the evangelical Ozarkers I grew up with. They walked the talk, and they were not monolithic. They struggled with their faith. They struggled with desire. They struggled with the way in which to take up the cross and follow Christ. I wanted to read that character on the page, as I'd never seen that character in any of the fiction that comes from New York and Boston and Los Angeles. And so along came Tyndall Hastings, a neurocomplex teen from a conservative evangelical family. that has just changed churches, a family that struggles to understand their daughter who's on the autism spectrum. I thought I might read this part here at the W. I haven't read it at any of the other places where I've read from this book, because the W produces badass graduates. And the Vandergrift College of Nursing and Health is really first rate. We should note last night that someone said 85% of those going to Vandergrift go on scholarship. Heavens, that's wonderful. What a gift to the future of our healthcare. There are a couple of healthcare terms that that I need to unpack really quickly. So let me do so. And as a trigger warning, if anybody has lost someone during COVID, this is going to be uncomfortable. Tyndall refers to ILE and ILE mentoring. In Springfield, Missouri, the high school students have and early college students or AP college students have this incredible benefit that they can work at the Catholic hospital and they can do things, since gods or doctors are gods of their wards, they can do things that can be perfunctory, like make me coffee, count the tongue depressors, or they can do things that, as the son of a lawyer, are shocking that they've been turned over to a young person. So she is one in the shocking department. Let me explain a device that they referred to during COVID as a PAPR, P-A-P-R. This is a powered air purifying respirator. And then also Tyndall refers to a bunny suit. The bunny suit was a part of the personal protective equipment that you equip respiratory care nurse with. I don't know why in Springfield they were called bunny suits. I don't know if they were called that in Mississippi. Maybe because the nurses were doing things that were horrifying and sad, and they applied, a kind of tenderness to this getup that was keeping them safe. So she'll talk about bunny suits. She also talks about how the outer gown of the bunny suit, it unties in the back and you take it forward to get rid of it when you're doffing. They write their names on the back in permanent magic marker, because as you're approaching a ventilated patient, most of the people who are going to be working with you are facing the patient, and in the bunny suit, you don't know who they are. They've got a VersaFlow on, they've got shroud, they've got mask, you might know them by their eyes if you're really astute, but probably not. They have a face shield, but they write that on the back so that you know, oh, this is Rodrigo, this is Jeff, this is Misty, this is etc. So here we go. The computer tablet Tyndall Hastings has mounted on the wall in the doffing room glows with data points from Frank Spanner's donning room. It's useful data, though she would rearrange all of its display. Most important, the provider who is about to emerge from the virus ICU, Misty, respiratory care nurse, checked out an iPad. That likely means a death call to family if no chaplain is available to assist. These small things carried in that travel without protocol, they frustrate her, but they also tell her the emotional freight the attending provider may bear. Tyndall scrolls down and spends some time recalling Misty via her photograph, a heavy, short young woman with glowing olive skin and beautiful black eyebrows, identifies Catholic. In the photograph, Misty smiles, and Tyndall wishes Misty were her friend. Misty's face is so inviting and caring. She wishes they could talk over Java chip frappuccinos. Tyndall has already doffed her too many times today. Misty will enter from the ICU door here in just a few minutes. Her battery pack on the PAPR won't last much longer. Scrolling down, yes, it's clear. Misty has endured a long shift. This needs to be her last procedure. The door to the anteroom from the hallway buzzes, so not Misty. Miss Cheryl Gephardt, head of human resources, and Dr. Corey, Tyndall's ILE mentor, busy themselves with hand hygiene. Finished in the anteroom, they enter the doffing room and take the two chairs Tyndall rarely uses. Why are Cheryl and Dr. Corey here? She can't conceive of greeting, so she doesn't bother and turns to the ward door. She holds her gloved hands up, palms facing her, and waits for Misty. She can sense Cheryl shifting in her chair, and Tyndall reflects that without any adipose, those hateful chairs would be even more punishing. Cheryl starts to say something, but Dr. Corey touches Cheryl's shoulder. The ward door buzzes, and Misty enters in her bunny suit. When she sees Tyndall, those big brown eyes melt behind her face shield. She's instantly a wet wreck. The papper whirs, and that numbing hum is the only sound in the room. iPad? Tyndall asks. Thank God, Misty holds it up. Place the iPad face down on that counter. Departing or returning? Tyndall speaks loudly, but only with authority and not with any emotion. The question is critical. The doffing routine changes if you have to send a provider back into care for more ventilated patients. Departing, Misty says, her small voice lost in all that equipment and in her struggle. Tyndall takes over. The voice she uses reminds her of mother's, direct, loud, and without a hint of anger, urgent love in the face of danger. If Misty makes one mistake, she can deliver a viral load to her eyes, nose, or mouth, a contamination that will at minimum drop her from the St. Martin's workforce for 10 days, and at worst, land her on her belly with an intubation tube ramjacked down her throat. Back to me. I'm going to unfasten your gown. Nod when ready. Misty's hood crinkles and her bonnet dips, then rises in a nod. Tyndall pauses at the name, handwritten in black permanent magic marker on the back of the gown. The I in Misty is dotted with a miniature heart. Name lettering is usually childlike and rugged on these gowns, but hers is pristine and feminine. Misty, and below that, boldly, RCN. She unties and pulls the fasts on the gown open, careful not to touch any part of Misty's back. Grab the gown at your chest, don't bunch it. Slide it forward, down your arms, down, now into the waste container. When Misty finishes, the nurse pauses. Her shoulders shake, her back rises, then falls. Turn to me. Misty's face bunches in a shining red fist of sorrow or anger. Tyndall can't tell. She has thanked the Lord every hour in this doffing room for her ability to not to grasp facial expressions as completely as neurotypicals claim they can. Remove your gloves, glove to glove, back of the fingers now, skin to skin, waste container, hand hygiene. Misty is so distraught that Tyndall chooses to initiate and mime the proper washing motions so that the nurse can lose herself in imitation. Free to the gown, the hood and face shield can make providers seem like balloon-headed sufferers of acromegaly, but Misty is stout, and this balances her appearance. Her tears are still flowing, but her breathing seems settled. She has that shattered look of mothers after a terrible fight and a long cry. New gloves, Misty jerks as if awakened and pulls on new sterile gloves. Face me, come close. Tyndall unties the shroud. Show me your back. When Misty complies, Tyndall grips the blower assembly on its belt. It's like a giant heavy fanny pack. It hums against her fingers and makes her sterile gloves sputter against her palms. Unbuckle your blower. When Misty complies, Tyndall has the full weight of the blower assembly and belt in her two hands. Lean forward, grip the loop on the top of your hood. There, you have it. Lift, lift. Misty's not getting it to move correctly. Lean forward more, Misty. Now lift. Misty is so tired that her arms are not delivering the strength she needs. Close your eyes tight, tight. Lift up and away from your head, up and away, eyes tight. This is awkward because the hose must remain attached to the shroud and belt, and Tyndall has to raise the belt to give Misty slack. Misty must not open her eyes because the face shield and shroud are teeming with virus. Now out and away, the back of Misty's arm trembles. Use both hands. You're tired. I know. I'm right here. Eyes tight. Okay. Okay. Hand me the head cover, shroud, and face shield. Eyes tight. There you go. Misty's head is bowed, eyes closed. She totters. Then, with her wet eyes still puckered, she moves her hands toward her mask, which has come undone in all this effort. Stop, don't. Tyndall barks. Her heart slams in her chest. Misty freezes. Do not touch your mask or face. You're fine, Misty. Do not fix your mask. Misty nods, but her forehead reddens. The tears start again. Tyndall has noticed that sometimes one tiny miscue in this process brings all of the danger and horror back to the nurses she helps, especially if the nurse makes the misstep. Then all composure can dissolve, and suddenly you're dealing with a real crisis. I'm right here. We're both safe. Open your eyes, doff those gloves, glove to glove, then that one skin to skin, waste container. Let's do hand hygiene. She pins the shroud, hose, and humming blower under her elbow. Then she imitates what Misty needs to do, washing with the hand sanitizer. New gloves. By the time Misty finishes, her mask is dangling. Now, waste container that mask. Here, take a new one. Do not touch the front or your eyes or nose, just the loops. That's it. Mask up, Buttercup. Misty snorts, and her crying eyes pinch at their corners, so she might be smiling. Tyndall might have gained her a laugh. Free and safe, Misty stands there for a moment, unsteady. Then Misty bows her head, and Tyndall extends her right hand. That's the rule. You must bow your head for Tyndall to pray over you. When Misty's eyes shut, they're so bruised with fatigue, it appears she's been in a fist fight. Lord God, Tyndall says so loudly, Cheryl jumps in her chair. Thank you for granting this warrior the strength to do your will and the courage to deliver your mercy. Misty whispers an amen. Then blinking, the RCN nurse gives a weary glance to the head of human resources and Dr. Corey. Dr. Corey? Miss Gephardt? Tyndall pulls the 3 wipes she'll need next and hangs them from her scrub pocket. What could these 2 administrators want with poor Misty? Jesus help her. Misty, go home and rest, Cheryl says. Her voice sounds rough. So it's Tyndall they came to see, not Misty. This might not be so good. Once Misty is left through the anteroom door, Cheryl stands and so does Dr. Corey. Tyndall, Cheryl begins, but she stops for a long while. If this is about the praying, she may not be able to keep her cool. It all started when that RCN nurse, Rodrigo, the one everyone calls Fabio, he bowed his head and in his sex-drenched accent asked, Tyndall, pray for me. And so she does. And then he tells everybody on his shift. Soon 2/3 of the nurses bow their heads at shift's end. Still, even in a Catholic-run hospital, vicious secular humanists run rampant. Tyndall, Cheryl begins. I don't think I could have done what you just did, not the way you did it. There's some grant money we've secured. We need to put you on full time. With one of the wipes, Tyndall mashes the button that turns off the Papper's blower, and the Papper makes its long goodbye sound. Weep. It's like a command that Tyndall cannot comply with, not in this setting, where there is so much help the nurses need. Maybe not anywhere. When Tyndall doesn't answer, Cheryl looks up at Dr. Corey. Though they are many arm lengths apart, Dr. Corey reaches out from across the room. Both she and Tyndall mimic squeezing hands. Lately, to get to the parking lot, you have to walk through most of the hospital, all the way from the virus ICU ward to what used to be a service hallway alongside emergency. Though in daylight, you encounter grumpy, confused patients masked up and scurrying to their specialist appointments or EKGs, phlebotomy, endoscopy, or MRIs. Tyndall doesn't mind it. That is, until the end of the shift, at night, when the last hall before the exit crowds with a mix of patients and visitors who ought to be sequestered in the ER lobby. Instead, they're seated in misery on the floor or pacing around, yakking into their cell phones with their masks on their chins. Tyndall can't understand how these aren't all suspected virus cases. Even the maskless guy lying there elevating his arm, which ends in a bloody wad of a towel with a baling wire tied to his wrist. She keeps her head down. She can't turn for breathing space toward either wall, patients mill on both sides of the hallway. She's almost free into the back parking lot when two swinging doors, which are supposed to be floor bolted, fly open. A woman with visible biceps, triceps, long hair, and no mask is howling and struggling with a masked EMT and the ER nurse, Carol. The woman is likely so loaded with virus, she's shedding it even from her bulging eyeballs. Her skin is the gray-brown hue of cream of mushroom soup. The woman shrieks that Carol is lying, that she doesn't have the virus. Nobody does. It's all a giant conspiracy from demonic, liberal, global health bureaucrats. Then Tyndall recognizes her. It's the girls' Sunday school teacher from Victory Faith Triumphant Church, the woman who barred Tyndall from Sunday school class and tried to ban her from worship. This crazy virus, just from her skin color, her oxygen level is probably low 70s at best, yet she's fighting and yelling like some ISIL terrorist. Misty, weaving with exhaustion, comes to her mind. Tyndall relives again the vision of the respiratory care nurse so fatigued she can't even command her arms to raise her shroud. Her eyes tight, tears streaming. The unmasked Sunday school teacher flings Carol backwards, and somehow she snagged the ER nurse's mask in her fist. Red rage floods Tyndall's vision. Just as she is about to pounce and destroy, Someone grabs the back of her scrubs at the elastic of her waist and the cuff of her neck. With a male bellow, he hauls her upward and rushes forward with her, bashing through the doors and out the exit into the blast of fresh air in the back parking lot. She rips loose and whirls. It's Frank Spanner, bent over and gasping. She stops herself from smashing him across the back and kneeing him in the balls. You can't. He huffs for breath. He sticks out a gloved hand to keep her away. We can't. He shakes his head. We can't lose you. Not right now. That in there, not your job. His mask bulges out and crackles in. Tyndall's breathing heavily too, with one hand behind her neck and the other at the small of her back. She's all twisted like a pretzel. Why'd you do that? Her skin itches where he touched her. Frank straightens his back. The mask hides almost everything about his expression. His eyes shine, meaningless as glass beads. Nurses talk, Tyndall, he huffs. St. Martin's can't lose you. Not like that. Not to a fool. Still pretzeled around and touching her back and neck, she stares at him. When she doesn't say anything for a long while, Frank snorts and shakes his head. Tyndall, you are so strange. Go home. Get some rest. We have to do all of this over again tomorrow for the good ones and for the lunatics and for the liars. He shuffles away into the dark parking lot. When Tyndall sees Mother's face lit up in the Lincoln's dome light, Nora with her pretty yellow mask on, she wonders if this is when you cry. Thank you. I'd love to answer any questions. Thank you so much for listening to Tyndall's story. Oh. You are such a champion.
I hope I'm not annoying anybody for how many
Oh my
questions I ask. You write from a perspective of a generation that's not your own, from Gen Z. And our class had a whole discussion about, because of how you could possibly have done that, because I couldn't imagine writing from a perspective of someone who wasn't from my generation, simply because it'd be just really difficult for me. I couldn't, it'd be, you know what I mean? Okay. I was just going to ask, what is your process of writing from that type of perspective, and what difficulties did you come across writing, having a narrative about a youth from today's ages, from Gen Z generation?
That's such a good question. The editors at Madville tossed out something that I thought was helping me with such stuff, because I thought, I'll eliminate a lot of the stuff, a lot of the TikTok and all that. I'll get rid of all that. I'll make this sort of like a dystopian novel, right? So people will have like chips in their wrists and all kinds of crazy stuff. And the editors were like, no, don't do this. And I'm so glad they did, because, the more I poured back into the book a kind of present tense reality, and I mean, we all lived through COVID in 2020 and January 6th and all that stuff. Could it get any more dystopian? My God, you can't outright that, right? So the more I dove into their equipment, what they have, what they're doing, I think maybe the better the fiction got. Further, I have the great benefit of, and I know looking at me, you're like, that's not right. I have the great benefit of being the cool uncle to many nephews and nieces, especially nieces who lived through COVID in a high school that in March of 2020, they were told congratulations, you've graduated. So watching them go through these things and listening to their problems, they'll often tell their aunt and uncle things that they will not tell their parents. Sometimes I wish they wouldn't do that. But that helped a great deal. And then crazy enough, writing this in the present tense helped because I actually think when you're 17 and 18, everything is present tense. It is absolutely present tense. There is no retirement in your future, right? You are right now, and you're the star of your movie, or the victim of your movie, depending on how you're feeling. So those little things helped, and sometimes it's little things that will get you to bridge that gap. And otherwise, a novel is a novel. These are characters. Who are they? What do they want? What will they do to get what they want? It's funny that people will say, okay, this is a young adult novel. Even the reviewer that Matt quoted said this is a young adult novel. The first novel I wrote was about a 16-year-old kid who worked in a limestone quarry in the Civil War in Springfield, Missouri, but nobody said that was a young adult novel. So, okay. Genre, just write it. Other questions?
Might be a big one.
Okay. Hey, Callie.
Hi. So I want to bring us to the place that you're writing from. You're speaking for voices in Middle America, where there maybe aren't so many stories coming from. And I'd like to ask you, other than your heart being in the place where you're from, what you saw is important setting in this story in the Ozarks and is a topic on humanity, what that can do for literary art.
Oh, wow. That is a big
Yeah,
question.
sorry.
No, don't be sorry. That's wow. It was interesting to watch from afar the Ozarks during the COVID crisis, because of course we couldn't go home. I couldn't go visit mom and dad. Mom was still alive because, we would be dragging the virus. Plus my wife worked in the Mississippi State Department of Health in the communications office. So she was really critical, and she was fighting that tsunami of misinformation and malicious BS that was getting in the way of real health information and getting in the way of saving lives. Watching the Ozarks, it was interesting when there would be synchronicity. A dear friend of ours, a friend of ours, Steve Edwards, was the head of not the Catholic hospital, but the other hospital. And he ended up on CNN talking about some of the things that they were doing. And then all of a sudden he started to receive death threats because he was telling people, mask up, get your vaccine, don't fight when you come to the ER, just common sense things. And that was surreal to see that. The Ozarks is very poor in places, but Springfield is where everyone comes for their health care. It's a city of about 180,000 people. And that's the biggest city in the Ozarks, third largest city in Missouri. So people would come from very far away and they would be very, very, very sick. As to the importance of writing this from the Ozarks, I guess I didn't think about that because I don't know any other way to write. It's where I grew up. It's where, the novelists that influenced me, Donald Harrington and Daniel Woodrell, that's where they came from. That's where my voice comes from. It's where, born and reared in Southern Hills subdivision. So I may never have thought of that question. Maybe the answer is like 5-6 years from now.
Maybe. Well, what I have to say about reading a story that comes from the Ozarks is that there's a narrative, as in all places. There's a narrative that comes along with it. New Orleans, Vegas,
Mhm.
LA, you
Mhm.
know. We don't always get to see deeper into a culture like the Ozarks. And your book touches on that in many ways. And so it feels like there's something behind it, you know,
Mm.
maybe giving people a look, opening the door into lives in the Ozarks.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Thank you. Since it's something I can't help doing, it's sort of autonomic. I don't set out to do such, but there it is.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, it's cool if, oh yeah. Mhm.
Thank you for that lovely reading. I have a question, but I haven't figured out a way to articulate it yet. I think one of the things you said in your introduction that struck me is how, New York, it feels like there's New York publishing and then everywhere else. It's sort of like there's not the South or Midwest. It's sort of like so many stories are taking place there. And I was just wondering, that made me think about like how you're just trying to give a complex story about someone who's evangelical, but not also just someone to be made fun of. And I wondered if you've thought about this trend, or maybe I'm making it up, in publishing writ large, about how I've noticed certain students in MFA programs sort of want their fictional characters to be just good, like morally good, like
Mm.
not, I'm not saying they want them to be complex, but just sort of like be better because of what so much that's happening in our culture is not good. And so I worry about like flattening, like a general tendency to flatten, even though we know that's not fundamentals of good writing, because we just, as artists, we want to put good in the world.
Yeah.
And is this thread making sense? Like,
Oh, it's
I
making
wonder
a
if
lot
you're
of sense.
seeing this,
Yeah.
or if you worry about this, or if you notice it and what you're doing, because I just, what we heard is not flat. It's very complex, and it's so many different things. So I just wondered if you could speak to that, or if that's something that you think about or worry about in fiction, or not in any kind of writing.
Brooke, that's a super question. Characters should surprise us, right? If they're any good, as we're writing a character, they should begin to do things that we think, what is this? Where's this coming from? Right. I mean, as I said, I set out to write. I thought, this is a crazy goal. It might drive me to, stay awake at 3:30 in the morning and type into my laptop and finish this. I'll write an evangelical character who's not a hypocrite. And then all of a sudden, she begins to look at the world through the neurodiverse lens that I knew from my nephew Will, who is on the autism spectrum and is an amazing gift to me as a writer, and a gift to his mother, and a gift to all of us. He just completed his engineering degree at the University of Arkansas. Her early intervention in his life changed his life profoundly. So here these characters are surprising us. We know even in our own actions, even on our own course and journey, we're not always good. We're terribly judgmental. We have rotten ideas. Frequently we have rotten ideas. And if we're not willing to let our characters sin openly on the page, how are we going to bridge that gap, that empathy gap that is the purpose of great fiction, right? I mean, you look at a great Toni Morrison novel like Song of Solomon. Her characters are not universally good, right? They do, they all kinds of mistakes they make in their lives, all kinds of profound regret and ghosts and all kinds of stuff. So it does concern me that that we err on the side of what Bill Harrison used to call the likable character. Oh, you want this person to be more likable. You want them to be more likable. It's like, well, you know, all the way back to Milton, right? It's like Satan was the most interesting character in Paradise Lost. Think about that when you write good characters, right? So that's a great question. I do worry about it. If someone grew up in the Ozarks, they're going to look at the world very differently than someone who grew up in Portland, Oregon, or New Orleans. Yeah. So, any other questions? Mhm.
I'm wondering at what point it became a COVID novel. Like, was that always baked in, or is that something that? And how do you think about? Because I kept thinking when the pandemic was happening, like we don't have a lot, or like there aren't a lot of famous examples of novels or even poems from the Spanish flu, right? In the 1920s, or like, maybe there are, and I'm just not familiar with them. But like, how do you feel about like potentially charting like a story that will become like one of these stories about this time period?
Well, first, I hope you're right. But I wanted Tyndall to be involved in healthcare because there are many people in my life who are in healthcare. Our sister-in-law is the head of was the head of human resources for Providence in Oregon, and came up through that world as a nurse. There are a lot of really important people in my life who are in nursing. So I wanted her to be involved in it. I had no idea how involved she would get in it. So here's the wild thing about doing research for books now, and this is a real Gen Z kind of thing to do for research, right? YouTube is a great research tool. Wow. So I don't know why at 3:30 in the morning I was looking at this and trying to understand what was happening around us, but there was a hospital in Houston that put that whole doffing and donning process in a video. And I don't know why they made that publicly available. As a communications officer at a press, I was like, you don't need to show people this. This is scary. You don't need to make them think about this. But they showed the whole thing, and they showed, and maybe it was that they were recruiting, that they were desperate for help, desperate for people, and they wanted to show, okay, this is a process. You can make a difference. You don't have to be a nurse to help these people get this stuff on and off. And yet, as you watched it, you were like, oh my God, I hope you've got great insurance if you're going to do this, because you are going to be all around this. I mean, this stuff is going to be filthy with deadly boogers. I mean, just really, really hard to deal with. So that's what I watched. I watched how the Houston hospital did it. It was like a 13-minute video, and I just watched it and watched it and watched it and watched it so that I knew every single part of what she needed to do. And I thought, well, let's put her in there, see what she does. You know, that's what she's going to want to do. If she sees that in a video, she's going to want to do that. That's Tyndall. So again, I don't know the answer about if it becomes a COVID novel that people point to. I also worry that publishers aren't publishing things about COVID, that they are rejecting things about COVID. They're saying nobody wants to, and we lived through it. Why should we not want to write about it, right? I mean, we write about the good things. We write about the bad things. It is cathartic to do so. It is important to do so. It is part of recording, you know, human experience. Let's do it. So, okay, any other questions? Okay, lovely. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for coming, everyone who has read all the authors from the entire weekend. It's been a fabulous 3 days or 2.5 days, or however you want to count it. It's always hard to believe that it is the end of our last session.
until next year, October 23 to 25, 2025, if I'm remembering my dates correctly, or if we don't have any last minute changes due to, I don't know, the conventions that are being booked or that kind of thing. But that's what we're planning for. So we hope to see you all next year. Thank you guys for coming out. And if you missed any part of it, most of it will be available on YouTube. There's a part of the keynote that didn't come through very well, but other than that, we'll edit that out. But the rest will be available on YouTube. So check our YouTube channel. Have a great afternoon and great rest of your weekend.